Welcome back everyone. So this is continuing on with the video of how to use parameter-driven Fusion 360 designs, and in this particular one we'll be looking at how to create and do the basic use of named dimensions. So the steps we'll be covering is choosing what needs parameters. So looking at your object, in this case it will be the filament reel, which parts do we need the parameters for? Then we'll look at how to create the parameters, and we'll look at pre-defining them in a list and how to create on the fly. Then we'll look at how to use parameters in measurements. So where you'd normally type in something like, we'll say 200 millimeters, how we can use a parameter instead so we can change that on the fly. Performing calculations where we might need to know the distance of one parameter take another parameter times something else, how we can do that. And then doing a test once we've done some design work. In this design, everything will be driven by the size of the spool. So we've got what's a representation of a filament spool here, and the dimensions that we need to understand are the outer diameter from here right across to here, the inner diameter for the hole on which it will be mounted on a hanger. We need to know the wall thickness, so top and bottom should be the same, but we'll need to know the wall thickness. We need to know the height from the very top outer edge to the bottom outer edge, and we need to know the width from the outer edge of the circumference to the inner edge where the spool will have the filament sitting on it, which is different to the hollow in the middle. So we're going to use those dimensions, and I've just drawn them up here, that we've got the outer wall thickness, the spool height, the outer spool to inner spool width, the spool diameter, and the inner hollow diameter. So I'll go through and create a new drawing, and we'll create all of these as we go, looking at how we first of all define those parameters. So I've started off with a blank drawing, and the first thing I'm going to do is save it. So I have created a subfolder under my filament spools just called video, and I will call this one spool and save. So we want to create some parameters. Parameters are hidden in the modify drop down. You probably won't have this one here. We'll talk about that further down the track, but change parameters is the one that you want to look at. And that will bring up pretty much a blank initial screen. And in here we can manually add in our own user parameters. So if I hit the plus button, it'll ask for a name. So I'm going to say spool, and we can't use spaces in here, so it's either camel case or underscores. So spool outer diameter. It will be measured in millimeters, but I may have it that it's got no unit, so if it was a count or some other measurement, but I'm going to work in millimeters. The expression is, in my case, the number of millimeters. So for me, I can't switch, but I'm going to make it 200 millimeters across for my reel, so 200, and I can put a text description in here, outer diameter or something like that. So just something that helps you or other people understand it. So that's created an entry there. I'll now create another one for the height of the edge of the spool. So I'll go spool, wall height. And in my case, I believe it was 3 millimeters. And I can just keep on adding variables like this that we'll use in a moment. So I will create another one, and this will be the outer to inner. So spool outer to in width, and I'm going to say that one is 54 millimeters. So I could go through and create them all in this manner to cover off the various ones that I've got here. So I've covered off that one, I've covered that one, and I've covered this one at the moment. But I'm going to show you a method to do the others on the fly. So if I go and start physically drawing, I will create a new drawing, and this will be my outer of my spool. So I'm just going to draw a circle attached to the center. Now instead of typing in a dimension, if I start typing in the name of that parameter, so spool, it will give me a list of options that I've already defined. So I'll take that one, and I now, if I hit enter, I have a formula that says that I have a 200mm diameter. So I will finish my sketch at that point, and I'm going to extrude it up. So I want it to come up by spool wall height, and go enter, and I now have a 3mm wall. So pretty straightforward so far. If I wanted to modify these at this point, I could come back into my change parameters and say, oh, actually my reel is going to be 150mm and the walls will be 10mm thick, something like that. And it will auto update to suit those dimensions. Now it may have made sense to have my spool inner hole as part of this extrusion, so I'm just going to go back and edit that sketch. Now I haven't created a dimension for this or a parameter, so what I'm going to do is one on the fly where I will draw a circle, and in here I'm going to make it something like 55mm, but what I'll do is type in a parameter name. So I'll start spool, and I can't use one that's already there, so I will go center hole diameter. Spelled that wrong, diameter. And then just go equals 55. It will know that it's millimeters as a default, but I could type millimeters if I wanted. Hit enter, and you'll now see that I should have in my parameters, now I did, oh no, there it is, hole center diameter. Because I typed it on the fly, it comes up as a favorite. I'm not sure why that's a favorite as opposed to these that I've created external manually, but you can make these favorites as well. It doesn't really make any difference apart from when you get a big list, favorites are at the top. So if I now go back, finish that sketch and go back to my extrude, and I can take the center out, I now have my center hole. So I will repeat that for my inner wall. So I'll create a new sketch on this surface, and I was going to say I could project here, which actually I probably will, because I'll use this to create an inner to outer. So I'll just do a P for project, and that will project my inner hole, and then I'm going to draw another one which will be a little bit bigger, and on this I will type in, actually I won't put a dimension on this as yet, I'm just going to leave it as a blank, so I'll just redraw that, because the way I'm going to measure this one is from an outer edge to the inner edge. So this will be spool outer to inner, and let's make that equal to 60mm. Now you can see it's done it, but I'm actually smaller than what this one here is, so I've sort of pulled a random number here. I'm just going to adjust this down so it's less than the inner, so let's say 50. I need it a little bit more, or I could go back and say, oh, I've made a mistake on my inner, I'll adjust that, but 40, okay, that will do. And finish sketch. So if I now do an extrude up on this one, I can pull that up, and this one can be a new dimension, which again I don't think I've created here, my overall width of my spool. So if I said, I probably need to define this one first, so I'm just going to hit enter on that and go in and define this in a separate part, and I think you'll understand why when I come back to do this. So we'll say spool. The reason I'm putting spool on everything is when I go on to do other components like my drawers, it just helps me understand when I'm searching. Everything that's a measurement for a spool starts with spool. So we'll say outer width, and this one can be 80. So this dimension is going to be this height here. So I called it spool outer height previously. It's now outer width. So I need to do a calculation to do this inner section the way that I've drawn it on top of this surface, because I need to know the difference of this to the outer and upward. And I'm also going to do something else, is I'm only going to draw halfway up, which will help me in some of my other views further down, that I'll just be able to look at half of the filament roll rather than having the top on it. I know there's other ways I could do that, but we'll just use this method. Alright, so I'm going to go back in and edit this extrusion, and I'm going to type a formula in there which will be spool outer width, and then I'll be taking away this wall here. So take spool spool wall height, so it's reduced it back down by 10 millimeters, but I only want half of this because I'm going to be splitting it. So I am going to go back and put a bracket around. Can I make this bigger to see? No, I can't. But so the wall height, go back to the start, I'll put a bracket around it, and I'm going to go 2 times and then go to the end of that and close the bracket, so it does that before it does the subtraction. You can't always guarantee it's going to use BODMAS, and it shouldn't be multiply, it should be a divide, because I wanted it to be half the height, so when I mirror it, it does it correctly later on. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not letting me do that. Oh, I can't, of course, I'm being an idiot. So the spool width divided by 2 is what I want there. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so we've now got that total spool size. And if I now do a mirror, where's my mirror? There it is. So I want to mirror a body, so I'll select the body, that one there. Mirror plane will be this top edge, and I could treat them as 2 separate parts, as a new body. And now I have my spool, and while it's probably way too thick for what I want, I have my spool. But the beauty now is I can simply go in and modify and say, I can shrink this back down now, I don't need all that info. Alright, my wall height is only 3 millimeters, and you'll see it does it on the fly as we update this. My spool outer diameter is 200 millimeters, and my inner to outer is 50, and that's probably a more realistic type of number for our spool. So we've just created that spool and been able to do some formulas to calculate dimensions on the fly. So if I now came along and used a different spool, rather than having to go into all of my sketches and change those different dimensions, it's as simple as going modify, change parameters, and change those few dimensions. Let's make the center hole a little bit smaller, and OK, and everything has dynamically updated for you. Alright, so hopefully that has made some sense as to how we create the parameters and can create them into formulas on the fly. So in the next video we're going to jump into how to start using components and driving those parameters between components. So we'll start to look at how to build up this portion of the model. And it gets a little bit more complex, but if you take some careful steps that I'll try to cover off, things will work out well. So we'll see you then.